And I think for the person who comes out of a group, understanding, no matter what kind of group it is, understanding what drew them to that particular group at that particular time in their life is an important part of their recovery. A cult is a little bit of a marriage. There's a desire on the part of the seeker, coupled with a vulnerability perhaps, change in life, a stressful time, an illness, a loss of a partner, leaving home. It could be any one of those things. There's a vulnerability and an opening. And what most people are not aware of is that there are a significant percentage of the population who will exploit that opening. And that's one of the things we don't teach our children. It took me several years later to understand that during those hypnotic sessions, he planted post-hypnotic suggestions. So you actually can be made to think you see things, or actually be deliberately made not to see or hear things. It's really eye-opening to realize you've been exploited. How can that happen? It hurts. That person who you trusted, maybe loved, doesn't care about you. Because people who are cult leaders don't have friends, don't have lovers, they have victims.
Madeleine Tobias, former cult member, exit counselor, therapist, and author, talks about mind control, cults, and cult leaders. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the cult that you were in?
Which ones? Oh, okay. I started with transcendental meditation. I had a cancer scare in the 1970s, which dates me a little bit. And that put me into the pursuit of what really is the meaning of life. What do I really want? And I had friends who did TM and they raved about it, and I started meditating. And I had some very interesting experiences in meditation that were very beautiful, and that got me going into the Eastern mode of life, so to speak. And I did TM for quite a bit, and then I met a charismatic social worker at the Red Cross where I worked, and got involved in a psychotherapy practice. I finished my master's in counseling and went in as a therapist in a group practice that was controlled by someone, how can I put this politely? He was very controlling, very charismatic, and for the next 10 years or so, I was involved in that kind of business-personal relationship with a very manipulative and exploitive individual. He exploited the people who work with him, and unfortunately, he exploited our patients as well, our clients.
Could you give an example of that?
Well, he had sex with his clients. That was one type of exploitation. He would also get involved in business relationships with them and exploit them financially. They became very dependent upon him, and we all became very dependent on him. In some ways, he was godlike. He was a meditator, so to speak, but mostly he was a manipulator and an exploitive person, and he enjoyed power. When that ended, and it ended when he moved to Florida, something about, how do you leave a cult? Well, he left us. And when that happened, I found out about the sexual exploitation of his clients. And that was just the straw that broke the camel's back. And whatever control or relationship we had ended abruptly. And that's when I had to start figuring out what happened to me. And I got involved with an anti-cult organization and found other people who had been in cults, various kinds of cults, and started working with ex-members, became involved in a group of ex-members, as well as working with the American Family Foundation, which is now ICSA. The names change over time. In 1993, Janja Lalich and I wrote a book together, Captive Hearts, Captive Minds, which was part of my recovery, to write a book about recovery from cults. When that book went out of print, Janja did a great job in rewriting the book, and it's now Taking Back Your Life. I also at the time did some exit counseling, help people come out of cults, and I continued to work as a therapist, working with ex-members in Connecticut.
And did you ever take any legal action concerning the former cult leader?
Yes, I did. I took legal action. We were involved in real estate deals, and he cheated me out of several $1,000s, at which point I sued him and recovered some small portion of it. But that was quite satisfying because it was a way of taking a stand and saying, you did me wrong, and it's going to stop. It absolutely was going to stop now. And it did.
But what was it that characterized this particular situation as cult-like?
I mean the psychotherapy cult?
Yes.
What characterized that as cult-like?
Because people take advantage of each other every day.
You know, you're absolutely right. People do take advantage. And sometimes it's pure exploitation, and at other times there's elements of mind control. In this case, what I would say was more cult-like about it was his deliberate use of trance states. He hypnotized a lot of people in a lot of his clients, hypnotized me for weight loss, and it was not being aware that in those hypnotic sessions, the suggestions that I requested for helping me to lose weight, he could also add his own suggestions, and he did. It took me several years later to understand that during those hypnotic sessions, he planted post-hypnotic suggestions that enabled him to have much more credibility and power.
In your own mind?
In my own mind, right.
And how was it that you became aware later on?
Well, it's interesting. I went to someone highly recommended who was a psychologist or a psychiatrist, I don't remember, who hypnotized me back to the original hypnotic state that I was in with him, and I was able to recall some of the things that happened in the trance state. So let me talk a little bit about trance state since we mentioned it. Not all cults use formal hypnosis. People ask me all the time, what is a trance state? What are altered states? And I'd like to make that really simple to understand, okay? The present state, as you're listening to this video, as I'm talking to you right now, you are aware of what you're seeing, hearing, the sensations around you. You're sitting in a chair or wherever you're sitting. We can call this the waking state. You're alert. All your senses are directed outside of you, and you're awake. Another simple state of awareness is, or not awareness, another state of consciousness is sleep state. We also know that there are various stages in sleep, dream states, deeper sleep states, but sleep is sleep. You're not aware. Your attention is all inside. And most of you is really down, and there's very little attention paid except to your own thought processes during dreaming. So those are two states of consciousness. You can have altered states of consciousness due to drugs, alcohol, substances, pot, LSD. Those are altered states as well. Another type of altered state would be a hypnotic state or a trance state, in which case your attention, you're awake, your attention is directed internally. So you're not paying attention to what you see, hear, or feel outside, but you're actually creating or imagining an inner world. Now, we could do this for ourselves, and many people use hypnotic states for their own self-improvement, for creativity. They may go to someone who's trained in clinical hypnosis for weight loss or to stop smoking. Hypnosis has been used for surgery without drugs. So there's many medical therapeutic uses for hypnosis. In the right hands, it could be very creative and adaptive, but with someone is manipulative or exploitive, they can use that altered state to add suggestions which you may not even be aware of that will influence how you behave later. You may have heard of stage hypnotists who do never get up on a stage with a stage hypnotist, who will put the group, 3 or 4 people, in a trance, and then later tell them to wake up from the trance. And I've seen this where they'll start clucking like a chicken or doing something silly at a cue from the hypnotist. One of the best videos that I've ever seen when I came out of the cult was Captive Minds, which was produced by the Canadian Broadcasting Company. It's a very old video, but it was excellent in the sense that it showed how hallucinations, both positive and negative, can be induced by hypnosis. So you actually can be made to think you see things, or actually be deliberately made not to see or hear things. In that video, a student is totally unaware that he's in a room full of other students who are laughing and joking. He thought he was alone, solely due to the effect of a post-hypnotic suggestion that he would not be aware of it.
This is confusing to many people, how hypnosis could have that powerful of an effect and yet not be widely known or understood.
Well, most people laugh off hypnosis. It does have a definite clinical use. And properly used, like any medicine or any tool, in the right hands, at the right time, for the right cause, it's beneficial. I mean, let's face it, we abuse a lot of substances, including alcohol, coffee, food. Hypnosis or trance states could be abused too. It's part of our culture.
And will a person hypnotized do something that they otherwise wouldn't choose to do?
They can. They can. However, if it's something directly against their ethics or morals, it would take quite a bit of prolonged and subtle trance states to change that ethic. And I think this is what's really important to understand with cults. When you're invited to meditate with a group, you're not aware that there might be added suggestions. Because, and the interesting part of this is, let's say you're in a large group meditating, and you meditate for 15 or 20 minutes with the guru or the leader. At the end, when everybody comes out of their meditation, you are still susceptible to suggestion. And if the suggestion is that the more meditation you have, the closer you'll get to God, or if the suggestion is such that you may see or hear or experience certain things in meditation, the more you meditate, then you actually get hooked into, gee, it might be a good idea for me to do more of this, or I want that. I once went to a large group meditation, and after the meditation was over, this was not TM, this was another type of Eastern group, the leader asked, what did you experience in meditation? And people would raise their hands and say, I saw this color, or I saw that color, or I experienced this and that. Well, I didn't experience any of those things. But the young girl next to me, she came up with this experience that she had in meditation. I looked at her, wow, she's really advanced, And her friend poked her and said, come on, you didn't have that. And she said, no, but I thought I'd say it anyway. So there's the desire to show I'm advancing, plus the suggestion that this is a good thing. If I didn't hear her friend say, that didn't happen to you, and she admitted it didn't happen to you, I would have believed that that was possible. I would have believed you could do that or have that in meditation. In that group, colors or whatever showed some level of advancement. So all of that is suggestion.
And you think that it's possible for a person to become addicted?
I wouldn't say addicted. Addicted would mean that if you stop, you'll have withdrawal. But I would say that it feels good for most people to meditate. If it felt awful, you wouldn't do it. And there's a goal out there. And occasionally you may be rewarded with the experience you seek in meditation. And you don't think of meditation as hypnosis. You don't think of the experience you seek as being suggestion. When they happen, you feel blessed, especially as that is how it is explained by the group. They reinforce positive experiences, and negative experiences or bad experiences or lack of experiences are always your fault. If only I did this, I would have that. And in some groups, lack of experiences are so condemned that you have to make up things. It varies from group to group. In some groups, you're even rewarded with badges, that you experienced this, or I am in cosmic consciousness, or I have experienced God consciousness, or whatever. So the desire is there that other people can have it, that can do it. And if they could do it, you could do it too. So there's a goal. The goal is that inner growth or inner spiritual growth, being closer to God, or in some groups even being God.
But what does that mean, spiritual?
For many of us, that searches to be a better person. If you believe in God and a possibility of knowing God or doing God's will would bring you closer to God, then if you're brought up in a religious or spiritual atmosphere, then that's part of your life. And if you're not brought up in a spiritual or religious atmosphere, you may feel that you're missing something. And then how do you get that? How do you get a religious or a spiritual experience? So that when someone says they've had an experience of God, or they found someone who could lead or show them the way, if you're in a vulnerable point of your life and you're seeking, there might be a match. There's a cult for everyone. It depends what you're looking for. I've heard of opera cults. I've heard of book cults. And recently I even heard of a cult that involved a professor and medical students. So there are all kinds of cults. There's something for everyone. And I think for the person who comes out of a group, understanding, no matter what kind of group it is, understanding what drew them to that particular group at that particular time in their life is an important part of their recovery. I know what drew me into transcendental meditation. I had a traumatic event. I thought I had cancer, and it started me thinking in ways that I hadn't thought about before. So I think the person who's come out needs to understand, and this is not blame or fault. I'm not talking about that. A cult is a little bit of a marriage. There's a desire on the part of the seeker, and coupled with a vulnerability perhaps, change in life, a stressful time, an illness, a loss of a partner, leaving home. It could be any one of those things. There's a vulnerability and an opening. And what most people are not aware of is that there are a significant percentage of the population who will exploit that opening. And that's one of the things we don't teach our children. That there are people out there who are bad. You think they're recognizable. They wear a black hat, like in the westerns of old. The good guy wore a white hat, the bad guy wore a black hat. bad people don't necessarily look bad. And people who exploit other people have the type of personality that need and want to control and exploit others. And it's really eye-opening to realize you've been exploited. How can that happen? It hurts. That person who you trusted, maybe loved, doesn't care about you. Because people who are cult leaders don't have friends, don't have lovers, they have victims.
So, does it really come down to something as black and white as naive, innocent people and conning, manipulative people?
I don't like to say naive because I never thought of myself as naive. I grew up in the Bronx. I knew about gangs and, my mother always told me to watch out for this one or that one, whatever. It almost feels like not so much bad people as evil, because it feels evil. These people are destroyers. They're not just interested in control or money or sex, whatever. They don't care if they destroy the person they exploit. And that is very hard to acknowledge for a good person. Very hard to acknowledge that there are people who are downright evil.
And where do you think that comes from?
Well, I could say that, let's see, 3% of the male population, 1% of the female population statistically are diagnosable as antisocial personality disorders. And people with antisocial personality disorders have no conscience. They're narcissistic. No one else exists outside themselves. They have a hard time seeing, they don't see the humanity of other people. They're quite limited in their own emotional lives. And they take pleasure in exploiting, controlling. Antisocial personality disorders is one of the personality disorders classified by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. So it's a classification of mental disorder. Are they ill? I don't know, that's where they function in life.
Is it genetic?
Possibly. I would say there's a probable genetic component, because we know there's a genetic components in depression, in schizophrenia. So our personalities, our character, are in part inherited, yes. The rest is nurture and education and socialization. But people with antisocial personality disorders display true personality problems very early in life. All the personality disorders aren't diagnosable until after the age of 18. Before that, they may say they have a conduct disorder, but there'll be definite signs of truancy, torture and killing of little animals, fire setting. There'll be behavioral issues that will show in childhood onward.
And for someone who doesn't understand the term, when we're talking about these people, what does manipulative mean? How do they act manipulative?
When a person is manipulative, they get their needs or wants made indirectly. Instead of saying, could you loan me $5? They will find a way of getting that $5 from you, with you hardly being aware of being asked. You'll want to give it. That's manipulative. It's not outright. It is not forthright. It's not assertive. Now, manipulation occurs in our society many, many times, over and over again. Many people just can't ask directly for what they want. And they'll be a little passive and they'll say, gee, I really could use the money, blah, blah, blah. But when I say manipulative in a cultic sense, in a cult, I'm talking about manipulating whole ways that a person behaves. In a cultic group, the leader in the group will dictate sometimes the smallest items of a person's life, like what kind of toothpaste to use, how to dress, how long you should sleep, when you should wake up, what you eat, what you wear, how often you pray, how often you come to class, what you give, what you tithe, how you bring up your children, whether you marry or not, whether you're celibate or not. So that's gross manipulation of a person.
But some people would say, yes, but why did someone agree to follow all those rules?
I think if the group was open and honest from the very beginning, that when you join, this is what's going to happen to you, people would say, absolutely not. Those kinds of controls come later, and they come slowly, some faster than others. And the closer you get to the core, the leadership of the group, the more controlling it is. So for some large groups that have thousands of members, there may be very little control on the outside. It's only as you get closer and closer into the depths of the group that it may become more controlling. Depends on the group.
So then one of the characteristics of a cult is an absence of disclosure.
Yes, absolutely, yes. I would say as a rule, that's pretty good, that you really do not know what you're getting into. When you join the Marines, for instance, people say, oh yeah, joining the Marines is a cult, or how are the Marines a cult? Because they're very controlling too. They control every piece of your life. They control what you think, what you do, what you wear, what you eat, when you march, how long, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, when you join the Marines, you know exactly what you're getting into. And it's not exploitive or manipulative. You know, and you say, I want to do this. I know someone who, from the age of 7, wanted to be a Marine. And he studied it. And as he got older, he never changed his mind. This was a goal in his life. He really believed in what the Marines believed in, and he wanted to be one. And you know, when he was 17, he joined. His parents gave their blessings because they knew this is what he wanted. And he stayed in the Marines for a number of years and will leave the Marines when he wants to. And that's the difference. He can leave when he wants to. As soon as you have to re-sign up every 3 or 4 years for a tour. But that's the difference between the armed forces and a cult.
Although people in cults also think they can leave. They think they're staying in because they want to.
That's a very good point. Right, they don't even think about leaving. It's not a question. They join for life. It is a way of life. Mm-hmm.
So how can a person in that situation know if they're being controlled or not? Because they think